A new day is coming to New Guinea. It comes quietly, at first slowly, gently pushing back the night sky with its own birth of color. It is very still, and the air is a little sweet from the scent of rain on the jungle. A man can give his heart to a new day and his hopes. A man can look up at a new dawn with all his soul and feel it grow into his being. And sometimes he will ache with loneliness, and in his own way will think a prayer for those who are flying into the coming day.
12th October 1943, the target for today is Rabaul. The striking force will consist of 326 airplanes, 114 Mitchells, 80s, and 125 Lightnings. The Mitchells will hit first, coming in at treetop height, strafing and dropping parachute fragmentation bombs. They will attack Ropopo and Bunakanau strips. The Liberators will follow 45 minutes later to destroy shipping in Simpson Harbor.
And the man who watches from the ground is given of himself and is part of that mission, and failure of airplane is part his failure, and death of a friend is dying a bit himself. No man is left behind on a mission. Therefore, all men have a right to ask, is a mission a sudden idea, an opportunist impulse? What is a mission?
Mission to Rabaul was conceived at a time when the Japanese occupied New Guinea as far as Salamanaua. Their air bases formed a shrewdly devised chain of defense with seldom more than 150 miles between links. Truk and Rabaul were the key positions, Rabaul the keystone. If the Japanese should lose Rabaul, New Guinea, New Britain, New Ireland, Truk, and the secondary islands would become untenable. They announced Rabaul's profound significance by building it into the strongest base in the Southwest Pacific area. Roughly, Rabaul is 500 miles from Port Moresby. Port Moresby is 550 miles from Wewak. Wewak is 600 miles from Rabaul. To strike Rabaul, it is first necessary to neutralize the right flank as far as north as Wewak.
These are the bombers' best friends, the fighters, the swift destroyers of the air who drive off enemy planes while bombers do their jobs. Fighters don't have the range of bombers. Marilinen is approximately 40 miles from Japanese-held Lae and 200 miles from Japanese-held Wewak. Here was the logical location for fighter strips which would make possible the proposed strikes on Wewak. An unique airborne operation, perhaps the only one of its kind. Every man, every tool, every weapon, every drop of gasoline was brought in by air. It was not easy. Men fought the jungle, mud, and malaria, were wet and hungry much of the time. The Japanese took a poor view of the whole idea and tried to interfere, even shot down several transports. was a job to do, and it was done. On time.
August 14th. Japanese Naval Air Service units relieve Army Air Service units in the New Britain area for operations in New Guinea. The enemy is preparing for increased activity both on the ground and in the air, most likely in the Salamanaua area, where his position is in danger. August 16th, Wewak. Bomber strength has been increased from 85 on 3rd August to 115 on 13th August. The strips of Wewak are crowded with fighters.
August 17th, the time has come for the 5th Air Force to strike Wewak.
Early on the morning of 17th August, the heavy bombers hit Wewak from 6,000 to 8,000 feet. More than 84 tons of bombs are dropped. Many fires are started. Much damage is done to the strips and to shipping in the harbor. For the first time, the Mitchells came over. What they saw and destroyed. 115 to 120 Japanese airplanes.
Salamanaua was the first enemy area to feel the effects of the Wewak strike. On 25th August, Allied ground forces were firmly established on a ridge overlooking Salamanaua. The Japanese ground installations were strong and well defended, but there was practically no air opposition.
Air support now becomes a primary function. Almost every day, the Salamanaua area is strafed. 1,000-pound bombs are dropped. Japanese are blasted out of Commiatum and Roosevelt Ridge surrounding Salamaua.
The jungle here was deep and impenetrable. The troops needed food, medical supplies, ammunition. This is a jungle trail, and these are the native carriers. Friendly, willing, tireless. They did their best, but it could never be good enough. So once again, the troop carriers flew into combat, unarmed, unarmored, always with a fighter escort. They flew in precise formations over enemy lines to drop the needed supplies. Korigazal, Skindiwal, Mubo, Goodview, other strange names, all were supplied by dropping. Days were saved and countless lives. The men with deep affection called them the biscuit bombers. Now Salamaua is in danger. If Salamaua fell, Lae must surely fall. The Japanese, caught by surprise at Wewak, tried desperately to establish major forward bases at Hansa Bay and Alexis Haven.
Hansa Bay is crowded with barges, shipping. From Hansa Bay, the Japanese are sending supplies and men to reinforce the Lae Salamanaua area. Hit by 98 heavy and medium bombers. Shipping, barges, ground installations are shattered by the impact of 196 tons of bombs. Then Alexis Haven. More supplies and men for the Lae Salamanaua area. These men and supplies must be prevented from reaching the forward areas.
Continuous reconnaissance indicated most of the supplies were coming from New Britain, specifically Cape Clouster and Borgen Bay. Suddenly, in the first days of September, the full weight of the 5th Air Force attack shifted to this area. Day after day, a relentless search was made for barges bringing supplies from New Britain to New Guinea.
One large Japanese barge loaded to capacity will carry rations for 6,200 men for one day. 3 barge loads per day will supply normal rations to a Japanese triangular division of 18,500. 50 barges will supply normal rations to a triangular division at a distance of 300 miles. approximately 250 barges plying between New Britain and New Guinea, 94 are sunk in 1 month. The barge business becomes unhealthy and the Japanese lose their stomach for this kind of dangerous living. Supplies from New Britain diminish.
Hopoi is about 20 miles east of Lae. The Japanese High Command must have forgotten all about this bit of coast as a possible beachhead, or perhaps they were confused by the diversification of the 5th Air Force tactics. It is reasonable to assume they believed Salamanaua was the first objective and Lae the problem of an indefinite future. They were encouraged to believe the last.
Whatever the reason, the Japanese are again caught by surprise on the 4th September. At precisely 7 a.m., Allied troops effect a landing at Bulu Plantation and the mouth of the Busu River. Lae is now cut off from the east.
Took shape rapidly. September 5th witnessed the first display of still another offensive weapon, the paratroops. And once again, the troop carriers did their share. The objective, Nadzab, only 16 miles west of Lae. Hopoi to the east, now Nadzab to the west. The day starts early in this kind of a job. The transports have been waiting all night. With the dawn, the paratroopers arrive, as planned. They've had breakfast, a good one, because no man knows when he will eat again. But he doesn't seem to mind. At last, he'll have a chance to jump into combat. He's been waiting a long time, waiting and training. And now the drudgery is over and the fun is about to begin. Once again, planning and coordination dominate the immediate future of history. Logical that the mediums will first strafe the area. It's logical there should be sufficient fighter cover to keep away any Japanese intruders. Logic demands there be a smoke screen to hide the operation from the curious or the inhospitable. Finally, logic leads to an inevitable conclusion. Take a deep breath and jump.
paratroopers are taking Nadzab, the Australian 7th Division is moving up the Markham Valley to relieve them. Their engineers build pontoon bridges across the Markham River. Small naval craft speed up the Markham, searching for enemy riverboats. The valley is alive with activity.
No time was lost in consolidating this new advanced base. Troop carriers brought in men and supplies, new strips were already being constructed. Step by step, according to plan, mission to Rabaul came closer. There was a driving force, an idea which gave tired men no rest. It was more than a command. It was logic sublimated to faith. Advance the bomber line. Advance the bomber line.
The Japanese Air Force suddenly comes to life, makes a feeble attempt to bomb Nadzab. There are no fighters at Nadzab yet, not even Ack-Ack. But the Japanese have become timid. They make one pass, hurry away. They leave a fire in the kunai grass, miss the strip entirely. Work goes on as if nothing had happened.
Salamanaua was taken September 11th. Lae was now cut off from every land route. The Japanese had only two ways of supplying Lae, by submarine or by air, and each must be done at night because of Allied air superiority.
Japanese crumble under the sustained attack of heavy and medium bombers. The bombing is so intense that an Australian general finally asked that it be stopped, remarking the only obstacle in the way of an immediate occupation of Lae is the 5th Air Force.
September 16th at 12:40, Lae was taken, and the last threat to southern New Guinea and the eastern Australian mainland was eliminated. As at Hope Boy, there was no enemy opposition left.
And so at last we come to Lae, one of the most beautiful harbors in the romantic South Seas. Ah, it is so peaceful, so lovely looking from the terrace across the sapphire blue harbor to the aerodrome. It thrills us to the very core to observe the heavenly ruins of what had once been the homes of the Japanese. We wanted to relax here, but there was quite an interesting family waiting for us on the strip. So we gathered our cameras and hurried off. We found the family scattered about the strip in a kind of gay disorder. The family had the quaintest names. This is Zeke. Betty. Little Sally. Good old Hamp. There's little Nell. And finally, Oscar. Then we gathered a few souvenirs and regretfully took our departure from this romantic spot.
Finchhaven is like a finger pointing threateningly at Cape Clouster and Madang. The Japanese worked hard to build up Finchhaven as a major base. It was now exposed to every kind of attack. Finchhaven was next. The mediums led the way in, hitting Langemak Bay with everything they had.
Of September, Allied forces land at Finchhaven near the Song River in a perfectly coordinated operation which includes Australian troops, American troops, and the U.S. Navy, all under the constant air cover of the 5th Air Force. Not a ship is hit, not a man lost.
The Japanese were desperately attempting to restore Wewak to its former strength. The Japanese Army Air Service could no longer stand by helplessly while its harried ground forces suffered heavy reverses without air support. Again, the strips were loaded. 27th September. The time had come to strike Wewak another crushing blow.
Tons of 500 and 1,000-pound bombs. 2,160 parachute fragmentation bombs were dropped. 167,275 rounds of machine gun bullets were fired. An estimated 60 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. Others were bombed and strafed with unobserved results. At least 14 fires were started. Flames, smoke, and explosions covered the aerodrome. Several anti-aircraft positions were silenced. All aircraft returned.
It all happened in 6 weeks. Out of Marilyn grew the first Wewak strike. Out of Wewak came the victories of Salamanaua, Lae, Finchhaven. Out of these came control of the Huon Gulf and the Vitia Straits. Now Cape Clouster on New Britain was only 65 miles away. In 6 weeks, the enemy had lost close to 1,000 airplanes, had lost valuable territory, had lost the battle for air supremacy, had lost the initiative.
October 1943. The enemy is making every effort to strengthen Rabaul. Reconnaissance reveals that some 20 vessels, including warships and large and small merchant ships, have recently entered the harbor. Less than 1 month ago, there were 102 fighters, 50 light bombers, 119 medium bombers. Since then, 100 fighters have been added. Many have gone to other areas, but on October 11th, there are 294 airplanes on the strips of Rabaul. Rabaul is also strongly defended on the ground. There are approximately 93 heavy, 43 medium, 188 light anti-aircraft guns of various caliber, not counting the guns of the naval vessels in the harbor. There are 60,000 troops. Rabaul is the most difficult target in the Southwest Pacific area.
Sometimes a man will look at the dawn, and there will be an emptiness in him for those who did not come back. And in his mind he will see the twisted wreckage and the bullet holes, and he will wonder at the cost of war.
Lieutenant General Kenny, Commanding General, 5th Air Force, makes a decisive survey. Rabaul will be attacked 12th October 1943.
A successful mission starts somewhere back in a factory. It includes a ship crossing an ocean, a harbor, men to unload what the ship has brought, this time bombs for Rabaul, prompt delivery guaranteed. There can be no respite for the men of the repair and maintenance echelons. There are no new airplanes for this show. Those that have flown so well must fly again. The ground crews do their jobs. Some will have worked 18 hours. They have put their bodies and their brains and their souls into these airplanes, and they too are a part of the mission to Rabaul.
Is a cumulative process, supply, maintenance. The seemingly mechanical factors of loading machine gun belts, of cleaning and installing guns. Loading bombs into bomb bays, 1,000-pounders, 500-pounders, parachute fragmentation bombs. Mission is a matter of intelligence. Men have worked weeks, even months, studying reconnaissance photos, intelligence reports. How long is the Rapopo Strip? 4,300 by 600 feet. Best landmark, Cape Gazelle, 5 miles east. The approach to Bunakanau Aerodrome is good, but bumpy and strong winds owing to uneven terrain. There is a radar installation south of Bunakanau at Tomavatur. Time is important. Split-second timing for perfect coordination. You will rendezvous over Oro Bay at a precise time. You will hit New Britain at a precise time, having followed a precise course. There is more to intelligence. Should you have to sit down somewhere, work your way back from the coast into the mountains, then toward Cape Clouster, traveling only at night. Carry plenty of silver, as the natives do not know paper money, but avoid the natives as much as possible. They are not guaranteed to be friendly.
Patiently, ingeniously, intelligence puts the parts together, and for them each part is their share of the mission to Rabaul. The non-flying crew members have done their jobs. As much as they could, they have given of themselves. Now the flying men take over.
the rendezvous. Airplanes come in from all directions, meet exactly as planned. No one wants to miss this first strafing of Rabaul. It's a date that's been a long time in the making, and at last the 5th Air Force is on its way to keep it.
This day, a kind of soft pale green. Sky too is soft, and its blue is the blue of an infant's eyes. The white clouds are streaked with the faintest pink, making a pastel world. The weather is fair and warm, and it gets warmer closer to the water.
You will fly at an altitude not to exceed 100 feet. You will maintain radio silence at all times, no matter what happens.
To play on the Japanese, a trick having to do with outwitting their radar installations. Maintaining low altitudes will bring the airplanes in under their radar beams. Radio silence will keep the air clear.
It's a long ride. More than 2 hours have gone by. It's getting warmer, too. There it is, the coast of New Britain.
Fighters. There they are, exactly on time and a welcome sight. Go in and keep a date. First, Canal.
Japanese airplanes get off the ground. The fighters are waiting. There goes the Japanese Hamp. The Lightning is hot after him. They're was a Japanese hamp. A plume of black smoke is its tombstone.
And now Rabaul.
Is in flames. 100 grounded aircraft are destroyed, 51 greatly damaged, 26 Japanese airplanes are shot down. Aerodrome installations suffer heavy destruction. There is practically no interception, and Ack is relatively weak and inaccurate.
Once again, the Japanese were surprised. At Wewak, 17th August, it was the Japanese Army Air Service. At Rabaul, 12th October, it was the Japanese Naval Air Service. Each apparently suffers from the same weakness. Each seems to lack the resilience to cope with the various elements of surprise.
The 12th of October mission to Rabaul was successful because of the planned series of missions that preceded it. Every serviceable combat airplane of the 5th Air Force, fighters, bombers, troop carriers, went out day after day, the same squadrons, the same pilots, the same crews in the same airplanes. Day after day, they hit the same targets, strips cut out of the jungle, installations hidden under coconut trees. No great cities, no factories, no geometrical spectacles of fire and smoke, just more jungle and more coconuts.
What is a mission? A mission is part of a plan, the product of intelligence, imagination, courage, sleepless nights. A mission will start months before the day of the strike with the scratching of a fighter strip deep in the jungle. It will call for ground and naval operations. It will require the full cooperation of the man with the shovel and the wrench, the laboratory and the drafting board. It will bring death and pain and the unshed tears of friends and the bewildered sorrow of mothers and fathers. In payment for that, there can be only one last definition. A mission is a step forward on a long and carefully mapped road to victory.
The Japanese tide had reached its high water mark in New Guinea by the summer of 1942. But we held at Port Moresby and then started on the difficult road back. After the recapture of Kokoda, we gained valuable footholds on the north side of the Owen Stanley Range at Buna and at Milne Bay. Before Salamaua, Japanese resistance tightened. Our objective was the strategic Yuan Gulf coast. The Australians of the 6th Division were pushing slowly northward toward Salamaua. The enemy had to be routed out from concealed jungle positions. Jap pillboxes and machine gun nests had been worked into the natural contour of the terrain. They were difficult to detect and difficult to get at. For the ground forces, it was mostly small arms warfare. Whatever artillery they had was lugged up to the front line through dense malarial jungles and over almost impassable rain-soaked mountains. Inching their way up New Guinea, the diggers took heavy losses. The best chance of survival for the wounded lay in their quick removal to advanced stations where they were evacuated by transport plane to base hospitals. American troops came up to relieve the Aussies in the push toward Salamaua. The incredibly difficult terrain threw the burden of supply on air transport. Escorting these supply planes monopolized the attention of much of our fighter air force. Supplies dropped near the forward positions were picked up by native carriers. An alternative to these costly infiltration tactics was about to be tried out. By leapfrogging a strong ground force to the rear of an enemy stronghold, we could cut off supplies and block his escape. This involved a concentrated use of air power. First, against Salamaua itself. B-26s hit at the harbor supply depot at Kila Village, a section of the Salamaua waterfront. Liberators on this raid of August 14th dropped bombs on artillery emplacements in Chinatown. Also, along the main supply trails leading to the front lines. A 172 tons were dropped on this one day alone by heavies and mediums. Gun emplacements near the enemy front lines were blasted. A heavy bomb load was directed against the waterfront area where supplies were landed. From the 13th to the 16th of August, the 5th Air Force dropped 450 tons of high explosives and incendiaries around Salamaua. Only 10 buildings were left standing on the isthmus. Here was effective cooperation with the ground troops. An important purpose of these ground advances was to push our bomber line forward. From a remnant of 3 planes at Moresby a year earlier, the 5th Air Force managed to build up an effective air fleet based on New Guinea. Jap opposition radiated from Rabaul, the center of a system of ocean transport which fed their advanced garrisons. These were located near the few navigable harbors. The Japs had been fighting an air war in the Southwest Pacific with a network of many bases. They could expand their striking force at any one point by quickly flying in more planes. Now, according to a systematic plan, our Air Force struck out at the whole enemy network. One objective, the large Japanese air fleet in the Southwest Pacific. The other main objective, the enemy's shipping of supplies and reinforcements to New Guinea. It was necessary to attack all enemy aerodromes. At Waiwak, supposedly out of range of our fighter escort, the Japs built up a main staging base for their New Guinea air fleets, with large drones at Waiwak and Borum and 2 additional fields nearby. Here they built blast pens for the hundreds of planes which were rushed in to stop our growing air offensive. Waiwak was a ripe target, but could not be bombed in daylight without fighter protection. In spite of the distance, a raid by B-25s was planned. P-38 escort was supplied from a secret advanced fighter base. They struck on August 17th, moving into line abreast for strafing. Previous to this strike, the only attacks against Waiwak had been delivered by heavy bombers and at night. Not expecting a daylight raid, the Jap planes were lined up wingtip to wingtip. 26 B-25s, escorted by 83 P-38s, destroyed 120 Japanese planes here at Waiwak proper and the other 3 fields. The angle of attack permitted several planes to strafe at once. Another squadron hit Borum in line abreast formation, concentrating their firepower. Again, Jap planes of all types were sitting targets. Parafrag bombs, 415 clusters of 23 pounds each, were dropped on revetments to add to the damage done by strafing. After repeated attacks, the 4 Wewak strips were littered with smoking ruins. The smoke on the left is the Wewak field. On the right, Borum, caused by heavy bombers which preceded the B-25s and pre-dawn attacks. Liberators continued to strike for the next 3 days. On this raid of August 20th, the general base installations were the target. Wewak field was hit again. Borum was patterned with bomb bursts. Zeros attacked the B-24s. Lightning escort intercepted. We lost 10 planes in these 4 days. The enemy, 309. East of Wewak was Nubia Airfield, located on Hansa Bay, an important staging base for Japanese shipping. At Nubia, the usual pattern of attack was followed. First, the air installations were hit by B-24s attacking with 1,000-pound demolition bombs from 16,000 feet. They concentrated on the bivouac and supply area to the right of the airstrip. Later in the same day, in this case August 25th, the target was hit again by formations of B-25s. Coming in low, they strafed planes on the field, destroying them before they could take off. The bivouac areas were also attacked. The target was ringed with ack-ack emplacements hidden in the woods. The Mitchells dropped delayed action bombs from treetop level into such concealed installations. Delayed action bombs were found to be better than parafrags against this type of target. A 180 tons in all were dropped that day. 4 days later, the shipping in Hansa Bay became the primary target. We caught them unloading supplies. On this raid, a cargo vessel was set afire. We destroyed 8 barges, 9 luggers, and a power launch. Supply dumps were fired. 1 of our 27 bombers was shot down by anti-aircraft, but no enemy planes offered interception. This campaign was to illustrate how an Air Force can maintain a strangling sea blockade. Still closer to us was Alexishafen, where the Japs transshipped supplies onto small barges. These were moved down the coast to the Yuan Peninsula in an attempt to slip by our blockade. On August 29, Mitchell bombers appeared over the harbor at Alexishafen to destroy reinforcements intended for the Huon coast. Our low-level bombers strafed all vessels in the harbor. Oil dumps were fired. Shipping installations and personnel were also targets. 45 Mitchells took part. On September 9th, 20 Mitchells with an escort of 15 fighters made a sweep along the northern New Guinea coast. Shore installations were strafed and bombed. We inflicted casualties on the personnel of these small garrisons. Supply dumps were fired. The enemy offered no air interception. Barges were moving southeast toward Finchhaven, hugging the coast. Very often they were camouflaged with branches of trees. More than 25 Jap barges were destroyed on this one day. The nearest enemy airdrome on New Britain was at Cape Clouster. The Jap shipping lanes passed close to their own airfields for protection. The 8 forward-firing guns of the B-25s packed a terrific wallop against ack-ack emplacements. In spite of the flak thrown up, the Cape Clouster runway was thoroughly carpeted with bombs. This advanced airstrip was kept neutralized by attacks right up to the day of Allied airborne operations. We ran into an ack-ack ambush. Flaming tracers came at us broadside, putting our nose guns at a disadvantage. But the mission was accomplished. Lae, a combination air and shipping base, was bombed continually. On August 28th, flying fortresses from an altitude of 12,000 feet dropped 29 tons on the waterfront area at Lae. We destroyed supply dumps, 3 jetties, and 29 barges. Propaganda pamphlets were also dropped for the edification of the Jap garrison. Lae was being softened up for direct attack, which was to come in the following week. Instead of using all its planes against the immediate objective, the 5th Air Force attacked every enemy base within range. By September 1943, the Jap Air Force on New Guinea was temporarily paralyzed, long enough to make possible the daring and speedy ground advances that immediately followed. Our Air Force was able to cooperate directly with ground troops. The jungles around Salamanaua were infested with Japs. They had to be smoked out. Hidden in the jungle, the enemy made a more difficult target from the air. Planes had to swoop in very low to get at them by strafing. A novel method of spotting for heavier bombers was used. Mortars laid down smoke shells on Jap positions to locate them for planes flying overhead. This cooperation between ground and air forces resulted in very accurate bombing of camouflaged positions. But the blasted defenders of Salamanaua still held out to win time for Lae. Lae is the key to the Huon Peninsula. The jump across from the peninsula to the island of New Britain is only 50 miles. The enemy had 2 good airfields at Lae. The garrisons at Lae and Salamanaua were estimated at one time to total 15,000 men. Flat and 5 miles wide, the Markham Valley is terrain ideally suited for airfields. But the Japs used only an old emergency field at Nadzab. The valley is the land route to the interior. Control of the valley would be necessary in cutting off and holding the Huon Peninsula. Because of the high mountain ranges, the only practicable method of seizing the valley in force was by airborne attack. General Blamey's troops had approached to within 3/4 of a mile of Salamanaua village by the end of August. Before the Jap garrison could fall back on Lae, the first surprise came. An amphibious force bypassed Salamanaua to attack Lae on its left flank, cutting Lae off from Finchhaven. The American Amphibious Command transported the Australian 9th Division. Dawn on September 4th, we approached Red Beach, 14 miles east of Lae. Destroyers laid down a barrage. Simultaneously, Liberator bombers were pounding Lae. Mitchell bombers strafed all points along the landing coast from which Jap artillery could shell the convoy. Further inland, B-25s attacked the airstrip at nearby Hope Point to soften it up for its imminent capture. Starting at 7 in the morning, the boats brought troops in all day as the beachhead was extended. Landing boats were manned by American amphibious engineers. The landing was virtually unopposed. The enemy assumed that our main force was engaged at Salamanaua. At midday, Jap bombers showed up. These caused our ships to take evasive action. But only 3 flew back. 3 had been shot down by our fighters, who downed 21 in all, against a loss of 2 Allied planes. The enemy attempted no further interception. As supplies were landed, the 9th pushed on toward Lae. Early on the morning of September 5th, one day after the Red Beach landing, paratroops dropped near Nadzab, a strategic point in the Markham Valley, and site of an old airfield 20 miles from Lae. Our landing astride the Markham Valley blocked the last vital artery to Lae now that the sea route was cut. This was one of the largest scale paratroop operations yet undertaken by the Allies. Planned by the commanding general of the Southwest Pacific, it demanded split-second synchronizing of movements on several airfields. A sand table of the drop zone was studied by all the men. Machine guns, carbines, grenade throwers, knives were among the small arms packed. Transports had been shifted to the proper fields. Each paratroop was equipped to be self-sustaining. Portable phones and handy talkies were carried. It was vital that immediate communication be established. The scattered groups would have to be organized quickly into combat order. Mobile pack howitzers were to be dropped in 7 bundles. Aussie artillerymen volunteered to make the jump too, with only 10 days training. But for most of these men, the next few days would test years of training. 5 days earlier, Australian engineers had started overland with a carrier line of 800 natives for a rendezvous with the paratroops at Nadzat. They marched 55 miles from an advanced air base over the most difficult terrain, packing heavy equipment. At Ward's Drome, outside Port Moresby, a large consignment of paratroops waited to take off. 1,700 men, heavily armed, were to drop on the enemy from the skies. White strips on top of their helmets would aid identification from the air. They would be delivered in 82 transport planes. Packs of ammunition, K-rations, and reserve equipment were to be dropped by chutes of various colors. The men had been thoroughly briefed on the use of paroles, or passwords, for night identification. But while they made last-minute adjustments, B-25s were already in the air, strafing the whole neighborhood of the drop zone. Each transport carried 21 paratroops. 8 airfields handled the takeoffs on perfect schedule, worked out by the troop carrier units. The pounding enemy drones were given paid dividends right at the start. Japanese planes attacking our airfields now could have caused terrible destruction. Our complete air superiority permitted a daylight jump. Without it, a night jump would have been indicated. At this moment, B-24s were dropping 94 tons of bombs on Heath's plantation, a strong garrison between Lae and Nadzat. Troop carriers had to fly over the top of the Owen Stanley Range, where the rendezvous with the P-38 escort was accomplished according to plan. 146 fighters were used on each side and above the C-47s. The formations, in loose V-of-Vs, were staggered from 15 to 20,000 feet most of the way. For all of these men, it was the first combat jump. 7 A-20s, specially equipped, preceded the formation. They were to lay a smoke screen upwind of enemy concentrations. A weather plane was over the drop zone at dawn, and any sudden change in the wind or cloud ceiling would have been signaled. The operation was postponable. The men were to drop in 3 adjacent areas, each of which had a screen laid by a pair of A-20s. One A-20 flew slightly behind and above the other so as to pick up the screen just before the other left off. Each plane had 4 tanks, discharging 2, then counting 4 seconds and discharging the other 2 tanks. The average length of each screen was 4,500 feet. The men hooked their static lines, and a minute after the smoke screen was started, they jumped. The transports had changed from a loose V of V's to a close 6-ship right echelon formation in order to drop the men close together. It was the lowest mass jump yet recorded in action. The screen was laid at a height of 250 feet. The smoke settled to the ground and rose to about 400 feet quickly. It gave perfect concealment for 2 minutes and, drifting slowly, provided effective cover for another 5 minutes. The smoke was planned to drift toward enemy positions, hiding us for the longest possible time. In 1 minute and 10 seconds, all of the 1,700 paratroops had dropped. Some landed in trees, but casualties were few. The men were landed close together and immediately gathered up their equipment and formed into offensive groups. 5 B-17s hovered over and dropped supplies when signaled by Panel. The kunai grass hampered the job of finding and assembling the heavy equipment, although it did offer perfect concealment. B-25s continued to strafe and fire all villages and concentrations between Nadzab and Lae, before, during, and after the descent. 300 tons of bombs were dropped on the Lae-Nadzab area in 5 days. In the meantime, the party of Australian engineers had forced its way to the bank of the Markham River, where they hid until they saw the paratroops dropping. On this cue, they crossed the 2,400-foot wide river in rubber boats. A pontoon bridge was quickly constructed across the Markham River. The air operation was such a surprise that no ground forces were encountered except the regular Markham Valley patrols, which was soon destroyed. Not a single enemy plane showed up to challenge the landing, a tribute to the 5th Air Force Bomber Command, which had pounded enemy airfields relentlessly. Nadzab was captured the same day. The overgrown Nadzab strip was immediately cleared and enlarged by burning away brush. From Tsili Tsili, the first transports took off for Nadzab. This secret base had allowed fighter escort against Wewak. The C-47, workhorse of the campaign, was now used again by troop carrier units to transport the Australian 7th Division to Nadzab in another surprise move. The airborne Aussies were flown in with equipment ready for action. On September 6th, only 1 day after the paratroop descent, C-47s were landing at Nadzab. Panels marked improvised landing strips. A few minor accidents were inevitable because of the bumpy condition of the field. But the troop carrier outfits maintained a speedy timetable. Their ability to land C-47s on rough fields with heavy equipment gives airborne infantry great mobility. A few paratroopers sustained minor injuries of the leg fracture and sprained ankle variety. After first aid, they were flown back to base hospitals. The shuttle service continued without let-up. In an airborne operation, speed is absolutely vital. Assembly of personnel and equipment in combat order must be accomplished before the enemy has time to strike back in force. Jeeps, bulldozers, and scrapers were also flown in by transport planes. Delivery of engineering equipment by air permits the speedier advance of our bomber line to new bases in the interior. Nadzab, a neglected Jap emergency field, was taking on the appearance of a major 5th Air Force base. C-47s kept landing Australian infantrymen while the field was being put into shape. By September 8th, Nadzab was swarming with ground troops. Here was a significant date in the history of warfare. Through the use of air power, a complete, fully equipped division was landed to take the enemy from the rear. The Australian 7th is a crack division. General MacArthur had called them the greatest jungle troops in the world, after Buna and Gona. They relieved the paratroops and headed immediately for Lae, preceded by an air and artillery barrage. The first resistance was scattered. At no point did we lose the initiative. Now began a race for Lae between two claws of the pincers. Meanwhile, Salamaua was assaulted frontally. Under an artillery barrage, General Blamey's troops crossed the Francisco River at several points and completed the annihilation of the Salamaua garrison on September 11th. An important harbor and airfield were captured here. The 9th Division pushed on along the coast, past the Bulu River. There was great rivalry between the 9th and the 7th. General Montgomery had called the 9th the greatest desert fighters in the world after Tobruk and El Alamein. Now they were out to beat the 7th at their own game, jungle fighting. Heavy artillery's lack of mobility in the Pacific area points up graphically the value of bombing planes. The soldiers of the 9th promised they would be in Lae in 14 days. They skirted the jungle when possible. In 11 days, they were 2 miles from Lae, in sight of their objective. It seemed certain that they would get to Lae first, but here they ran into strong Jap opposition. There were pillboxes and machine gun nests in the jungles alongside the last river barrier to Lae. Gun emplacements were hidden in the overgrown shores. B-25s came to the rescue, giving the terrain a complete going over. The Japs were making their last stand, not in the village proper, already plastered by bombs, but in the jungle outside. A-20s assisted with parafrags. The answer to Jap killment was light bomber low-level attacks. Artillery emplacements at the elbow of the river took a thorough pasting. The bridge was not touched. It was to be used for the crossing. The 7th Division from Nadzab was still 6 miles away. They ran into a Japanese block at Heath's Plantation. When they overcame this, there was no further serious resistance in the rear of Lae. On the morning of September 15th, fortresses wheeled over Lae. Watches from the nearby 9th saw the 2nd formation fly over without bombing. And B-26s came in low but did not strike, because the 7th was already moving into Lae proper and had signaled our planes. Lae was officially captured at 12:40 September 16th. 2 days under the 14 promised, the 9th Division marched across the Bumbu River Bridge into Lae, only to find the 7th Division already there for an hour and a half, examining the booty. Japanese troops who escaped into the jungle were eventually trapped along the coast. The paratroops made this inevitable by cutting the Markham Valley route to the interior. Chinatown, the enemy's main ammunition dump, was pulverized. Lae Harbor provided visual evidence of how the Air Force helped to cut sea lanes. Many types of enemy ships were represented. The Lae airfield had been rendered completely unusable before the approach of our infantry. The wreckage of 60 enemy planes was left behind. Inoperative planes were festooned like Christmas trees to protect what remained from our air bombardments. The 2 large airstrips captured would have come in handy later on. The paratroop operation, by flanking the Huon Peninsula, contributed to the landings on New Britain. It also allowed control of the Markham and Ramu valleys, threatening the rear of Meidang and points north. The airborne operation was the only practicable way of seizing Nadzab before the fall of Lae. The 5th Air Force, by seizing control of the sky, made possible the success of the amphibious and paratroop landings. This control was timed to mesh perfectly with the airborne operation. The Troop Carrier Command delivered large numbers of men and equipment in the shortest possible time. The boldness of the attack on Lae took the enemy by surprise. Resistance was relatively light, but the Airborne Command was ready for tougher opposition. It has proved its value as a weapon that strikes with unparalleled speed and surprise.